Thank you very much. Shalom Naimod. When I hear this you're a wonderful moderator, and I have to say I have to update my bio because some of those projects I had seemed to forget. But I had basically worked on the issue of terrorism, counter-terrorism, when Lockerbie happened. And my first visit to Israel was in 1990. I came here with one mission of understanding Hezbollah in Lebanon. I tried to do that as best as I could, and everyone said my career would be over when Israel would withdraw from South Lebanon in 2000. So I redirected my career towards Hamas and then Al-Qaeda. But now I feel, listening to the talks, that I'm being dragged back to the Hezbollah and the Iranian-Syrian nexus, which is very important, and therefore I'm delighted to be here. I brought together with some slides just to make it a little bit easier, because we're facing a challenge of foreign terrorist fighters, as the ambassador was saying. We need to have reintegration strategies. The threat is very starkly posed by the returning foreign terrorist fighters, and has been so for several years. What do we do with them? And different member states are better prepared than others. About 1/3 of about 5,500 have already returned, and about 2,500 are out in theater in Syria and Iraq and beyond. And that's a large number for European states. But there's also not just battle-hardened, violence-promoting men, but you also have women and children. You have entire families out there. And this was brought very starkly to me when in fact, in France, for example, French official reported that there have been 460 minors out with Daesh. Half of them are under the age of 5, and half have been born in theater. Growing up in that environment, of course, with extreme violence is, of course, deeply traumatizing, but many of them come back and are reinserted into society with very little assistance. And for me, it's really a no-brainer in relation to what the ambassador was saying, that repressive measures, police security, and prevention are not mutually exclusive. They are complementary. I would like to have sensors out in the community when these people come back, not just the security service who get flagged by individuals. And I think that's an important sort of strong argument. My main message to you here today is to think broadly about some of these issues. I'm seeing it from my perspective, to take a helicopter perspective of these environments. Too often we look down a straw to some extent in looking at individual plots, looking at individual events in particular countries. But I would argue, if we're going to make any headway in Europe, etc., we shouldn't just focus on the returnees. We should focus also on the milieus, the environments that are there. Without being alarmist, of course, there is a very small percentage of individuals who will perpetrate terrorism. But if you look at just 3 member states, you have over 60,000 individuals who are on the intelligence and security radar at different categories, different levels, of course. So we have to start treating this as sort of, I would say, an ecosystem of networks, and to understand those a little bit better. Of course, with returning foreign fighters, we also should not lose track of one aspect, and that is it triggers polarization. It triggers right-wing extremism. And we're seeing right-wing extremism, divisive, anti-Semitic, anti-democratic movements are gathering pace using these developments. And we have to be cognizant of that well, what that does. And also we have to work towards creating evidence base, being a researcher, or should we say, someone who straddles both worlds in terms of academia as well as belonging to an independent government think tank. we're very cognizant of that. You know, what do we really know? And in a plug of selfless promotion, I want to maybe, if you have a chance, because we're barraged, tsunami of publications, you can take a look at our latest on the Swedish foreign fighters, and there's an international chapter. Actually, what do we know? And this study was based on Swedish Security Service records of 263 foreign fighters out of 300. We get a pretty good picture of what is happening in our country. And I would encourage other countries to security services to release that data so that we can get a better understanding. I see Professor Renares, who did an equal study with evidence-based of the foreign jihadists incarcerated in Spain, involving over 200 cases with some interesting results. On the right hand, you have a manual that we just completed within the EU Radicalization Awareness Network, and that manual is really an insight into what are some of the practical guidance that the EU Radicalization Awareness Network Center of Excellence have brought together from 3,000 practitioners across the EU. You know, how do you deal with these sort of different dimensions? So these are free of charge, but also available on the web. And I hope that they are used, because it is these sort of practical documents that can really be a frame of reference in relation to this. I'm going to be telegraphic in my presentation, because I can see here this clock is ticking down. Now, I hope I got the numbers of Netherlands right. I think I'm off by 5, but maybe things have changed recently. But this is the scale and scope. From my neck of the woods up in the Nordic areas, we have almost 600 foreign fighters. And you can see those in parentheses, that those are the numbers who've come back. So in Sweden, 150 have come back. In some countries, you would think, you know, like Finland, you wouldn't have a problem. But as you know, the recent knife attack, etc., also illustrated one of the issues that I think is important to be cognizant about, and that is denied asylum seekers who may pose or present a threat. I don't want to overestimate that threat, but there have been several cases, and I think that is also a dimension that needs further sort of screening in relation to creating sort of the prevention. You can see the scale and scope of that. Now, most of the milieus and the environments that we have really is maybe most starkly illustrated by the Moroccan network that perpetrated the large-scale Mumbai-style attack. It is no surprise that security services have been talking about this since 2009. This really came into a perfect storm during those two issues and incidences. And those working in the law enforcement and intelligence sphere will know that building these sort of maps, networks, is quite important. It shows the overlapping networks that exist. But it is not just these commander style network that we have to be worried about being dispatched and deployed from Syria. It also exists across, I would say, different operational levels. On the left-hand side, you had one of the Swedes who participated in the Paris attacks, commanding the 3 attack teams from Brussels, not from Sweden, but from Brussels, who had come back. In the middle, you had the failed asylum seeker, Afghan boy who did an attack, but who linked himself up to ISIS during the attack. And the third one hit very close to home, and that was the Omar Hussein attack in Copenhagen against the Jewish synagogue, and also Lars Vilks issue. Now, no connections to any IS, etc., but also illustrated starkly that he belonged to a gang criminal environment. And I think this is the sort of key issue. Most of the attacks we're seeing are not independent in some way or another once the investigations are launched our direct connections to IS. Social media and encryption is an important dimension and area. It's not just Telegram, though it is a very important platform, but it gravitates. And some of the, not only in different languages, the Russian VK and others, but you also have these operatives very well aware of how signals intelligence work in some levels and make many mistakes. But you know, this arena is really where the real battles are being placed. And then, of course, it is no surprise that I think many were talking when the internet were developed, that we're moving towards you know, a virtual organizational structure or an ecosystem that gravitates in different directions. And I think in that sense, the battle against the narrative, the counter messaging, is very difficult arena to be in, and also to measure levels of effectiveness. But nevertheless, we have to make inroads in that arena. The other issue is we have several extremist milieus and networks in parallel across Europe. When the Barcelona attacks happened, I, having visited Spain, immediately knew that Ceuta, Melilla, and Barcelona and Madrid were the main hotbeds, but particularly Barcelona and Catalonia, which Fernando Renares had been saying for years. And in fact, these networks stretch across Europe, and not just up through Molenbeek, through France, but all across Europe. Some of the more serious players we've had in Scandinavia and the Nordics have been from the North African network. But it's not just the North African network staying within one should we say, sphere. You'll see Jyllandsposten down there has been was attacked by 4 Swedes. David Headley, a name familiar to you, they had a similar person who they had contact with, Abu Omar in Sweden, who was also Moroccan, but he navigated. So you see the Pakistani theater and the North African theater, they overlap. And as you know, we had a terrorist attack in Stockholm. There will be a trial of a man named Rahmat Akilov. He was not from the Middle East. He was from Central Asia. And we have a Chechen and a Central Asian network that are also overlapping over this. And of course, we have to be cognizant of that. The third issue, which we're not focusing in on enough, is on foreign terrorist fighter microfinancing. We have done some studies. We have gone across Europe to many financial intelligence units. How are these foreign fighters financing themselves? And we did one study for the Swedish authorities, interviewing all the agencies. And what we found was not surprising, that it is not money that they were lacking. And I think that one needs to map this out in order to see not only patterns, but also the microfinancing schemes. This, of course, is not the big money, but there is a lot of schemes that are being generated, including VAT fraud, insurance fraud, bank loans, quick loans before they leave to theater, neighborhood crowdfunding to individuals, also money coming in from the outside, etc. I think this is an arena we really need to start mapping out. And of course, it is the nebulous thing about charity humanitarian causes. Do intelligence services have enough information or ability to be able to track where this money is going? So this is a vast arena. I just want to dip down. I see my time is almost sort of running out. I want to dip down in just a couple of studies that we did. We did the first one, and as you can see, almost 25% are women. But what we found was that 70% are resident in segregated areas, and 80% came from 4 cities. This maybe it's not surprising, but you see a large percentage of individuals coming from particular areas. If you, in Belgium, Antwerp and Brussels, I think 75% come from those areas. And as you can see, 75% are Swedish citizens, but only 34% were born in Sweden. And you see the same thing with the Norwegian Security Service study on foreign fighters, where you see that 61% had immigrated to Norway in their teens. There is a vulnerability there that has been exploited, but also that 17.5% had lost parents during their childhood. The most thorough and the gold standard is the German Security Services study on foreign fighters. And here I just want to point out just two areas. The first is that it has the same pattern in relation to that it's concentrated along 13 cities with 10 or more foreign fighters who have left. And when it comes to radicalization, friends and contact at mosques were most influential areas. The internet was only a decisive factor in 17% of the cases. But you can see here that these were the principal factors. This, of course, will change as individuals are being incarcerated in relation to having a larger population, perhaps being prosecuted for this. And this is almost my last slide, Jonathan. I see my time is up. I know you're a strict moderator. But I wanted to sort of say, what are the prospects then for reintegration, resocialization? It's a very difficult area. And the conclusion from the German evidence-based study, from all the cases they looked at, was that 10% came back because of disillusionment and frustration, 10% because of pressure from family members, but more than 48% returned to extremist milieus. And therefore, we have to focus on these extremist milieus that begin with the hate preachers, that go down to the financiers, the logisticians, etc., in order to be able to make a dent in this issue. And I'll leave you with this sort of slide. This is really issues to consider. You can read more about it in the EU radicalization awareness, the EU returning manual that we have done in relation to what, how do you do risk assessment, how do you do multi-agency case management, etc. And then lastly, I will finish with my second Israeli word, and that's Toda Rabba.
ICT, International